to what the pandemic and the economic shutdown mean for the U.S. and mean for municipal bonds. The high yield part of the market, the project finance, let's leave that alone. That's going to be under a lot of pressure, and we see that in retirement centers and stadium bonds, et cetera. But the bread and butter of the market, which are the general obligation bonds, even revenue bonds, you look at MTA, which has certainly been under pressure. They came to market 2 weeks ago, and the deal was oversubscribed, and it shows the essential nature of the service. It shows the long-term viability that the market believes in it. So there's a lot of noise still to come, a lot of uncertainty around all of this, including in the municipal market. But the idea that states and cities are going to declare bankruptcy around this, or your bonds are not going to pay, is just not correct.
Peter Hayes, what has the price of bonds done? I remember talking to you years ago when California was blowing up. Price down, yield up. What a huge on paper. What have municipal bonds actually done as they await Washington's salvation?
It's been a roller coaster, and I guess that's probably true of most asset classes when you go back to the beginning of March. We had a 2-week period where the index went from, the Bloomberg index went from up over 3%. So remember, beginning of the year it was up 3.7, come all the way down, now we're back to flat. And I think it's because it gets back to your first question, Tom, around the uncertainty and the impact of what will happen in the market going forward. I think, the Fed did come in with the municipal liquidity facility, which is a good backstop for issuers that having the source and bridge cash flow needs. But they haven't done anything directly in the market, and now perhaps over the last 7 or 8 trading sessions, the market feels much more healthy. Maybe they don't have to. And the state of Illinois came to market last week, oversubscribed many times. They were able to upsize the deal. They came at a premium spread, so they're certainly paying for some of the economic pain and some of their credit situations actually coming into the market. But nonetheless, the market cleared. So I think that the market is beginning to heal itself, but it still has a long way to go.
Peter, do you think that the Fed will actually go into negative rates? And what would be the impact on, therefore, muni bonds?
So I've never been an interesting question. I've never been a real believer in negative rates, and certainly if you believe Chairman Powell and the Fed rhetoric lately, you wouldn't think so. It seems that the economy would really have to take a big second wave downturn that would prolong this recession well into 2021, I think, for rates to go negative. Might they get close on the front end? Well, they're pretty close now. But I think for the curve you get, it's difficult to see negative rates. It's difficult to see what's happened in some of the European countries and elsewhere around the world happen in the U.S. So I'm not a believer, but rates may fall again. I still think there's sort of a lot of economic uncertainty. I don't think the market has fully appreciated the magnitude of this downturn. Look at retail sales last week. Look at the jobs numbers. So we could go lower in rates. And when we go lower in rates, likely that municipal yields will go lower as well.
Что если секрет к настоящему здоровью и ощущению себя полным сил и энергии на протяжении всего дня не в таблетках, витаминах или даже диетах? Что если хорошее здоровье никак не связано с тем, как часто вы занимаетесь спортом? Что если быть абсолютно здоровым было бы так же просто, как сидеть прямо там, где вы сейчас находитесь? Дорогой друг, то, что увидите дальше, может сильно вас удивить. Видите ли, когда речь заходит про здоровье и энергию, все говорят про правильное питание и спорт, но никто не говорит главного. Правда в том, что наше тело здорово ровно настолько, насколько здоровы клетки, из которого оно состоит. А что является самым важным для наших клеток? Вы знаете ответ? Позвольте дать вам подсказку. Это слово из 8 букв, где первая буква К и последняя буква Д. Вы можете заполнить пробелы? Если вы абсолютно уверены в том, что знаете правильный ответ, тогда нам с вами больше не о чем говорить. Но, если вы не знаете ответ или просто хотите подтвердить, что вы правы, я хочу, чтобы вы на минуту остановились и посмотрели специальный мастер-класс, который я для вас приготовил, кликнув по кнопке в этом видео. Позвольте представиться. Меня зовут Алексей Дементьев. Я предприниматель и биохакер, автор многих образовательных программ-бестселлеров и частый спикер конференций. И уже более десятка лет я исследую возможности человеческого организма. На специальном
One of the aspects we're seeing in this is what appears to be a very difficult choice between, on the one hand, public health, safety, well-being, lives, and on the other hand, the economy. Do you think that we're striking that balance more or less the right way?
Well, just to question the predicate of that, I think that's a real, that juxtaposition is sometimes a bit off. I think there's health issues on both sides, obviously, and a lot has been talked about this now, wherein, extreme poverty, obviously, is a health risk and all the things that proceed from it, and also, depression, drug addiction, suicide at an extreme, but basically life expectancy comes from, a fall off, a collapse in GDP, and this is unprecedented. So this would be off any of those charts. So I think it's not just health versus economy, it's health, it's economy on both sides. And by the way, the health issues may be more neutral than some people think. Once the curve is, the original intent to flatten the curve was just to stretch out the exposures that people would have so it didn't overwhelm the healthcare system. But the fact of the matter is, I think, unless we're going to hunker down until a vaccine comes up or until the virus is obliterated from the face of the earth, which I think is too long to keep the whole country on welfare, eventually people are going to go back, and when they come back, the infection rate is going to go up. So I think we're just postponing the exposures and the infections, of course, to a time when we're better able to deal with it than we were at the beginning. But we're not going to avoid health problems from this virus unless we wanted to freeze the economy for too long than anybody can really think, could really contemplate.
Well, Lloyd, that's actually one of my questions, which is whether it's on the health front or for them on the economic front, extraordinary efforts are being made. Are we postponing what happens, or are we actually changing what happens? Is this a timing matter only?
Well, to some degree, look, if Deus Ex Machina, a vaccine appears, and I know there was some positive news today, but just think it has to go through trials for, we have to make sure it doesn't kill people, make sure it's effective, it has to be manufactured, distributed. That's really, the country can't be on welfare even that long, even if there was, that was something that was magical. We are postponing it, but that doesn't mean it's without help. They're learning things about treating viruses, even if there's not a vaccine. There are treatments that people are aware of. So there is some benefit to it, but not as huge as if there were an ultimate vaccine that would make people comfortable. So I think to a greater extent, we're postponing people's exposure to it. And to some extent, we're eliminating the direst of risks that would happen if the healthcare system was overwhelmed while people had it. But I think in the long run, we have to contemplate that people will go back to work, what kind of economy we'll face, and no matter when you do it, look what happened in some of these Asian countries where they were high-fiving because the virus, the new exposures were way, way down. And notwithstanding that, the second they go back to work, they spike up again. So that's going to be an expectation no matter when you do it. I think when we go forward and look back at this from sometime in the future, if we're going to go through that anyway, people will be very critical if the official sector sacrificed more of the economy than they needed to, even because at the end of the day, I think the exposures are going to be, almost the same.
Every manager knows keeping track of your team's day-to-day workload is a challenge.
Dr. Sharfstein, I thought of you this weekend when I looked down upon Central Park and saw that, yeah, maybe sort of kind of like we were socially distanced, but the truth is there were a lot of people in Central Park. The whole operation here seems to wrap around masks, masks of different shades, masks that are bandanas, masks that are a scarf, masks that are just a hunk of cotton. Maybe there's some medical stuff, and a very few select people have the fancy N95 masks. Give us a clinic now. Are masks, are they going to be what gets this nation back to work?
I think masks will help a little bit. And I think it's a good idea for people to wear masks. They don't have to be the fancy medical masks. In order to protect other people, what the mask does is block the droplets coming out of somebody's mouth. And because people aren't sure, they may not be aware that they are infectious because the symptoms haven't started yet, it's a good thing to wear a mask to protect other people. But the real thing that protects people is the distance between them. The physical barriers, the 6 feet, the redoing the schedule so there are not as many people in the office. All of those things are important. The masks are kind of like the icing on the cake, so to speak.
Joshua, it's good to hear that the masks are an icing on the cake, but the idea here, and you see it in the Washington Post chart of a 7-day moving average, clearly the tone is we're moving to a better place. Where is the place we're moving to?
Well, I think it's good news, obviously, that there's been a little bit of a drift down, and I think a lot of people are taking a lot of precautions, which is good, and people have to maintain that. You know, the virus appears to be a little slower to transmit in the heat, so that's a good sign for the time being, but it also means that we could be getting a false sense of security that we're distancing enough, and when the fall hits, it could go right back up again. So I think it's still pretty uncertain right now.
Josh, give me a sense of what we know about immunity, right? Do we have a clearer sense now than we did even 10 days ago about how many people are immune?
So I think that there's a lot of positive signs and some more recent positive signs that there is evidence of immunity, but the case hasn't been proven. And so the positive signs include animal studies where the animals get re-challenged and don't seem to get sick again. The fact that there really aren't compelling stories of scientific investigations of people who have gotten very sick twice with different strains. I think more evidence will come out, but we're going in the direction that when people are sick with the coronavirus, they may have less of a chance of getting sick for some period of time. And that's good for a lot of different reasons. Now, that's a little bit different from saying we know exactly how to measure that, and so the tests have to be really calibrated with that. So I think we're getting a little bit more optimistic that such immunity exists. We will be able to measure it, and that will be good not only for some people's knowledge about whether they're relatively protected, but it'll be good also as a sign for different kinds of therapies. It makes it hopeful that maybe the convalescent serum will provide some protection. And of course, with the fact that immunity does exist, if once we know that for sure, that would be a good sign for a vaccine.
Josh, when do we find out whether contact tracing is really effective in protecting people?
Well, we know contact tracing is effective in general. The question that we need to know is whether the United States can launch programs that do it well. And that depends on training, and the Johns Hopkins training course now has over 150,000 people enrolled, which is great. It's free online. But a lot more is needed because these programs have to be run very well. You have to be able to find contacts quickly. You have to be able to support people in quarantine, get them food if they need it, get them other supplies, move them to a different place if they can't safely quarantine at home. These are the requirements that have been successful when implemented in other places. If we can do that well, it'll really matter.
Joshua, it's unfair to ask this question, but it's so emergent right now, particularly for the Midwest. I thought I'd ask it. I don't want you to comment directly on the Panhandle, but in Texas, where they're really starting to open things up, there seems to be a focus on Amarillo, Texas. Are we going to see a lot more of these? Or, I don't like the phrase hot spots, but statistically, are we going to see these flare-ups around the country?
Unquestionably, we will. And I think particularly as we open up, there are just a lot of risks. And, we saw just one choir practice had like 60 people infected and 2 died. We're going to see situations where, people who may not realize that they're sick or feel mildly ill and don't think in a million years it could be coronavirus, go out, they're not wearing masks, they get too close to other people, and we're going to find out that it's still a virus that has tremendous capacity.
Мы сделали инвестиции простыми и понятными. Больше не нужно изучать
The market, as it always does, has divided itself into 2 camps. There are those who are optimistic about controlling the pandemic and reviving growth, and there are those who aren't. Which camp do you fall into?
Well, I think that the real divide, Eric, is the ones who think it'll come easily and quickly, and the ones who think it'll come slowly and haltingly. And I'm in the latter category in that regard. there's a divide between the people who think that stocks are fully to highly priced today, given the economic outlook, and there are people who think that's okay because the Fed will make sure that the whole economy and all the markets levitate. And in many ways, that's the more important divide today. We all think that life will go on. There will be a return some part of the way toward normalcy. There will be a vaccine and so forth. But the big divide is the people who don't understand why stocks are where they are, and the people who do understand it by interiorizing the old motto, you can't fight the Fed. And that is I think, an even bigger divide today.
What do you think? Can you fight the Fed?
I think that the Fed has great power, but not forever. And I think that, first of all, I don't think it really, Jay Powell talked about the Fed having, will not have the ability to run out of ammunition. I don't know if the Fed's ammunition is really limitless. I know that the Fed can cause markets to rise and stay up as long as it buys, but I don't know if it can buy forever. We're in new territory here. Historically, the Fed has never bought corporate securities. This time around, they included corporate securities, and then they moved on to include non-investment grade corporate securities. Its buying can make these things rise, but only as long as it's buying. I think of it as kind of, we've seen these things where there's kind of a column of water and then a ball sitting on top of the water. And as long as the water's forced up, the ball stays there. Water stops, ball falls down to earth. So obviously the Fed hopes that its buying will, among other things, inject confidence into people and that they'll take over in buying. But that remains to be seen, and it remains to be seen whether that buying will be at today's levels.
Is there any reason, Howard, to expect that's going to happen? Let's just talk about the corporate bond market, but use as an analogy the 10 years that followed the financial crisis. We had QE1, 2, 3, and every time the Fed tried to pull liquidity out of the market, it seemed, investors rebelled. There was the taper tantrum. There was the fourth quarter of 2018 and other instances. Are you suggesting that the moment the Fed tries to withdraw liquidity from a market that really prices itself on solvency more than anything else, the same thing's going to happen?
I think it has to happen to some extent. This is the dilemma. Can the Fed keep it up forever? And if it doesn't keep it up forever, will prices weaken? I mean, those of us in the markets believe that stocks and bonds as well are selling at prices that they wouldn't sell at if the Fed were not the dominant force, at prices that would be determined by just the outlook for the companies. And so, number one, if the Fed were to recede, we would all take over as buyers, but I don't think at these levels. And, you mentioned the difficulty of withdrawing the support. I personally believe that there is too much concern with the downside of withdrawing the support and not enough concern with the downside of never withdrawing the support. And I think that if it had been done earlier and gradually, it could have been done. And as you say, there was a bit of a temper tantrum in the fourth quarter of 18 when the interest rate on the 10-year Treasury reached 3.25. I think that was October 4th. And the market started to go down from there. So, of course, the kids like candy and investors like low rates, but we have to have discipline also.
If you manage a team, you should be using Monday.com. It's a platform to manage any team and any project, marketing campaigns.
For now, the Federal Reserve has drawn the line at fallen angels, investment-grade bonds that were downgraded to junk. And we've talked about what that has done for the investment-grade market. And the Fed is also buying, at the moment, high-yield ETFs. Right. What if, Howard, the Fed goes further into junk territory? What if it decides that it's okay to buy double Bs or perhaps even lower-rated debt?
Their arsenal has been described as limitless. I still believe that it'll only work as long as it works, and as long as they're actively doing it. Look, Eric, what if the Fed said, we're going to be the buyer in every transaction? Every bond transaction, every stock transaction, we're going to be the buyer. The Fed has an unlimited checkbook. You know, our checks never clear, so we're gonna buy forever. You know, this Fed has increased its balance sheet up to 10 trillion. There's no limit. We'll buy them all. Well, in theory, they could do that, and in theory, if they bought aggressively, they could make all the markets rise. Now, everybody would know that that's a Potemkin market, that it's a fake, and the minute they stopped, things would collapse.
How do these considerations and concerns affect what Oaktree is doing, affect what Oaktree is buying, and when Oaktree is buying?
Sure. We were a very active buyer in the public debt markets in mid-March. And then on the 23rd or 4th of March, the government and Fed started to talk about what their program would be, and around the 26th they announced it, and that drove up prices in the public credit markets to the point where we're not buying as aggressively at this point in time. So it has changed the market from what it would have been if they hadn't gotten involved, and that has had impact for us, I think that's inescapable.
Do you think investment opportunities are likely to improve from this point forward, where you will see the opportunity, the possibility of making elevated returns again? Or are we sort of here now and here for the time being?
Well, you tell me, will the Fed decide to be the buyer on every transaction? In which case prices don't ever have to go down. In theory, you know, Yogi Berra said, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. But let's talk about the future in a serious way. So I mentioned that the rating agencies believe, and the investment banks, that between 15 and 25 or so % of the high yield bonds outstanding will default. That's roughly $400 billion. That's a lot to buy. In April, I believe there were 19 defaults or bankruptcies, and I believe that's the greatest in history, greatest single month in history. And we're just getting going. You know, defaults and bankruptcies largely occur when companies run out of cash. And the fact that 19 occurred in the first full month of the crisis, and that the crisis has months more to run, tells me there'll be more defaults and bankruptcy. And there, as I mentioned before, there are large, highly levered companies and investment vehicles that the government and Fed rescue program is not likely to reach and take care of. So we believe there'll be plenty. You know, it boggles the mind to think that we're going to have a crisis of the magnitude of this one and not have fallout. And typically, we have been able to profit from that fallout.
So is that to say that while Oaktree was buying aggressively in March, less so now, it may yet become a more aggressive buyer in the months ahead?
Absolutely. I mean, they, you know, like they say in a football game, we take what they give us. And the greater the dislocation, usually the greater the bargains, which means the greater our buying. we think that there's a substantial opportunity ahead.
Howard, like the rest of us, you've been trying to make sense of this pandemic and its implications for the economy and for companies. What conclusions have you reached?
Well, you know, the most important conclusion, Eric, is that, as I put it, we all have the same information about the present and the same ignorance about the future. There are very few facts about the future, and there are very few historical precedents or patterns to rely on.
That's true. I'm not going to deny it. But the question every investor is confronted with right now is, how do you put capital at risk with any degree of confidence when the outlook is perhaps, as you say, more uncertain than at any time in modern history?
And that is, of course, the great dilemma, because investing is only about positioning your capital to profit from future developments. And yet, I always say we don't know what the future holds, more so today probably than at any other time in my life. I think the first thing you have to assume is that life will go on. We will continue to have an economy. We will return to shopping and working and eating in restaurants, and children going to schools, and people traveling and taking vacations and so forth. But of course, we also have to make allowances for the possibility that life will be different than it was in the past. You know, I always say that the four most dangerous words in the world are "it's different this time," because people use those words to rationalize breaks from the past. Well, today we're living through a massive break from the past. There will be differences this time, and we have to try to imagine them and allow for the possibility in our analysis.
What kinds of differences do you anticipate?
Obviously, many people have been somewhat productive working from home. I feel I've been probably as productive as ever in the last 2 months. I say, well, now tell me again why I have an office and why I go there, and so forth. So that could be a big difference. We don't know, but it would change a lot. Restaurants, sports events, hotels, business travel, cruise ships, shopping malls, many of these things are now in a state of flux. But we have to make assumptions about them in order to be able to move forward.
Well, speaking of assumptions, the market, as it always does, has divided itself into two camps. There are those who are optimistic about controlling the pandemic and reviving growth, and there are those who aren't. Which camp do you fall into?
Well, I think that the real divide, Eric, is the ones who think it'll come easily and quickly, and the ones who think it'll come slowly and haltingly. And I'm in the latter category in that regard. I don't see a immediate V-shaped recovery, and people are talking about the possible recovery using different letters, V, U, W. My partner Bruce Karsh talks about an L-shaped recovery. Some people talk about the Nike swoosh. I think that we won't have a continuous uplift of good news. We'll have good news mixed with bad news. We'll have a vaccine, but it won't come this year, and it won't come to everybody immediately. You know, we need 7 billion doses for the whole world, and it's going to take a long time to manufacture those and roll them out. I will add one thing, Eric. There's another divide. There's a divide between the people who think that stocks are fully to highly priced today, given the economic outlook, and there are people who think that's okay because the Fed will make sure that the whole economy and all the markets levitate. And in many ways, that's the more important divide today. We all think that life will go on. There will be a return some part of the way toward normalcy. There will be a vaccine and so forth. But the big divide is the people who don't understand why stocks are where they are, and the people who do understand it by interiorizing the old motto, you can't fight the Fed. And that is I think, an even bigger divide today.
What do you think? Can you fight the Fed?
I think that the Fed has great power, but not forever. And I think that, first of all, I don't think it really, Jay Powell talked about the Fed having, will not have the ability to run out of ammunition. I don't know if the Fed's ammunition is really limited. I know that the Fed can cause markets to rise and stay up as long as it buys, but I don't know if it can buy forever. We're in new territory here. Historically, the Fed has never bought corporate securities. This time around, they included corporate.
Сколько времени вы тратите на то, чтобы обучить новичка работе в MLM? И какова вероятность того, что ваши партнеры смогут качественно...
Stefan, welcome and thank you for joining. So a robust immune reaction is what we're seeing out of your early phase trials. The next phase underway, how big will it be? How many people will be involved?
Yes, thank you for having me. So this is the data from the phase 1, the first 3 cohorts. This was 45 healthy adults run in Seattle. The next study is a phase 2 of around 600 healthy subjects that should start very soon. The FDA in the US has just given us the green light. And we said this morning that we are finalizing the protocol for the phase 3, which is the last clinical study before approval, which we are hoping to start in July of this year. The study will be several thousand healthy subjects across many countries. We are finalizing the protocol as we speak with the FDA, and we are hoping that people can start in July, as is our plan. After a few months of enrolling all those people in the studies, we should be able in the fall to get a good sense of the efficacy of a vaccine and hopefully filing for commercial approval towards the end of the year.
In terms of data, Stefan, how many doses does it look like the drug will need to be used in? And then in terms of antibody titers, these are the levels that regulators are looking for to establish benchmarks of success. What would you want those to be in the US?
Yes, so indeed, the piece that is exciting about this morning news is at the 2 lower doses we tried. So we tried 3 doses in the phase 1, 25 microgram, 100 microgram, and 250 microgram. And it's typical of a phase 1 where you try different doses to see where you get the best response. And we're very pleased to report that after 2 doses, or a prime and a boost, 3 weeks apart, that all the participants, and it's still a small study, but all participants at the 25 microgram and 100 microgram showed that they were having binding antibodies in their blood coming from vaccination that were at or above the level seen in convalescent sera, so i.e. in the blood of people who had been infected, which is what we are all shooting for in terms of how much antibody do you need. So we're very excited about this data.
Stefan, it's Guy in London. So I've got a couple of questions just to follow up there. The first one is, when people get COVID-19 naturally, do they have immunity once they have had it? Because you're producing more antibodies than a natural response. So I'm wondering, is it a longevity issue? If you are producing greater amounts of antibodies with your therapy, do I get longer immunity than I would if I've actually had COVID-19?
That's what we believe. I want to be careful because, as you know, because you report on the virus daily, we are still learning a lot about this virus. And I think all of us have to be very cautious about statements we make around the understanding of the biology of this virus. But that is indeed what we believe. We believe that if we're able to boost your immune system to a very high level above the concentration in the blood of people that are convalescent from infection, that should be very helpful. And we've shown that before. We have just finished a phase 2 study for another virus called cytomegalovirus, which is a very nasty virus, especially to women in the age of bearing a child. If a woman gets infected during pregnancy, she can lose her child or have very bad birth defect on the child. It's the #1 cause of birth defect in Europe or in the US, and there is no vaccine approved on the market. And we have shown in that study that we were able to boost seronegative, i.e. people that were never exposed to the virus, to around 10 times higher antibody to people that have been exposed to the virus. But even people that have been exposed to the virus were able to boost their antibodies to provide them stronger immunity. So that's why we are cautiously optimistic.
It's interesting. So older people tend to have less effective immune systems. So I'm curious, you have the initial dose and then you have a booster that comes after it. Is it likely that older people might get a kind of bigger second dose? Maybe you start off with the 25 and then maybe you have a 100 booster afterwards, or the other way. I'm not sure exactly which way it's going to work. But could you tailor the first one, the primary, and the secondary one, depending on age, to ensure that less effective immune systems can generate the kind of responses that you're talking about?
So the current design of the study is to use the same dose for prime and the boost, but we are studying different age cohorts. The data we released this morning is for 18 to 55 years of age, so people that are healthy with a kind of normal adult immune system. We have also added 3 cohorts in the US of 55 to 70 years old, and 3 additional cohorts from 71 and above. So we'll have to see and learn from the clinic, which is why we do those clinical studies. We could indeed potentially increase the second dose. What has been shown for other viruses and other vaccines, which is the boost is very important, especially for people that have a weaker immune system, like the elderly, or the very young, or people that have an immune disease or so on. Because when you basically do the first injection, you prime the immune system, you educate it, and then the antibody mature in your white cells. And then when you hit it again 3-4 weeks after, this is when you actually create memory immunity, which is very important. So we'll have to see with clinical data how to best customize and adapt to different age groups, and we will just follow the clinical data to design the best product we can.
What have the analyst and investor community suggested regarding the pricing model should this actually come to market commercially eventually? You must be thinking about pricing.
So as I shared this morning, because indeed I got the question, we have been so busy in the last 4 months to just focus on, one, getting the vaccine to move as fast as possible from a sequence, because remember, the sequence of this virus was first made public by the Chinese government on January 11. That is just 4 months ago. And we are with the green light to go into phase 2 from the FDA and finalizing the design of a phase 3 to start as early as July. So on the clinical front, our team has been so busy on just making this happen. And on the manufacturing front, we just announced 2 weeks ago a very strategic partnership with Lonza from Switzerland to boost our manufacturing capacity. Pre-COVID, we never had the plan in 2020 and 2021 to make so many doses that is required to protect millions, hundreds of millions of people. And so the plant we have in Massachusetts in the US is able to roughly do, assuming a 50 microgram dose or mid dose, to do around 100 million doses per year, which is for most commercial vaccines is very large. But when you have 7 billion people on the planet who are mostly naive to this virus, it's very tiny. And so we set a challenge with the team a few months ago. How do we set up ourselves to be able to provide up to 1 billion doses per year? And so this partnership with Lonza is very enabling because they have the expertise, they have clean rooms available where we can basically buy new equipment, put it in their facilities, and scale up the manufacturing process from being able to do now millions of doses per month to soon dozens of millions of doses per month to soon high dozen, up to close to 80 million doses a month to an equivalent of 1 billion doses per year.
Yes.
So we've already been focusing on that in the last 4 months and literally working 7 days a week. What we're going to do now is to really start to think about the vaccine in terms of, first, it's the value. What's the value of this vaccine to the healthcare system? As you know, the cost of the healthcare system between ICU stay, mask, all the disruption happening is very high. So we want to do climate data analysis because we're not going to launch in the next month or so.
Yes.
And then we're going to have, of course, discussion with governments because we want, of course, to be responsible given we are facing a pandemic.
Stefan, I want to ask you about the ties and back and forth with the administration and how critical that is. So you have received $500 million from the administration in federal funds to work on this. Also, one of your board members has just become the chief scientist for Operation Warp Speed. How critical is administration support, and will the US be first in line if there is indeed a vaccine at the end of this that works?
So that's a good question. So the role of government and large foundation is critical. What I worry the most about now is not how we're going to get the Moderna vaccine to work. I believe with what we've seen today, there's a good probability that the vaccine showing the antibody response we shared today, showing we can protect animals fully and protecting against replication of the virus in the lungs of the animals. I believe that those 2 data sets, plus all the data we have on 9 other vaccines that have been into the clinic, makes me believe these vaccines should provide protection. But what I worry the most about is so far we have not been able to get any help on manufacturing capacity. If we wait for the product to be approved, let's assume a best case scenario toward the end of this year, which would be remarkable. Usually, it takes 5, 8, 10 years to get vaccine approved. If we don't have enough capacity, people are going to die. Economies are going to stay impacted. And we need governments to be aggressive. In the US, we got help, as you say, from the US government. It is to help us fund very large clinical studies, which of course is very helpful. But as of today, we have not received from any government or any large foundation any help towards buying equipment, buying raw materials, so that we can make as many doses as we can now, to have as many doses as we can ready to ship the day, hopefully, we get an approval.
Stefan, I just got a couple of quick, I sort of, actually, it just folded into one. Does the first country to approve it, does the first region to approve it, get the vaccine first, following up on Vonnie's question? And messenger RNA vaccines in the past, have we ever seen a messenger RNA vaccine approved thus far? Do you think it's going to be harder for a messenger RNA vaccine to be approved? So, A, does the first country, first region to approve it get it first? Is there going to be any order in terms of sequencing of who gets it first? Is there any pressure from any country to deliver it first, i.e. from Washington? And is it harder for a messenger RNA vaccine to get approved in the first place, do you think?
So those are great questions. So on the first question, we are only allowed to provide the products where approved. As you know, medicine is a highly regulated industry. If, let's say, in the UK, the vaccine is not approved, we're not allowed by law to sell the vaccine. And so, let's say, if it's approved in the US and not in the UK, I'm just not allowed to sell it in the UK. But vice versa, obviously. If it's approved in the UK but not approved in the US, I'm allowed to sell it in the UK. I'm not allowed to sell it in the US.
Надо глянуть, что там она у меня. Рос и не дорос. Блять, я что-то вообще уже не соображаю, нахуй. Пизду, спать.